Hey, what's up guys and welcome back to askNK. Today we're taking a look at Embergen from Yanga Effects. Now the guys at Yanga Effects have gone ahead to release the beta version of Embergen. Previously we covered Embergen, the alpha version, and we looked at this amazing tool which you can use to create, real-time volumetric liquids and fluids and all those amazing stuff for both game, film, and so on and so forth. And it turns out that in the brand new version of Embergen, which is actually the beta version that is available right now that you can get, there's a whole lot of boxes that they've gone through to check. Now we're going to take a look at every new changes and improvement that has been done to the beta, and hopefully believe that so many other cool features will be coming out once this tool is released. Now if you want to get a copy of this, you can go over to yangafx.com. I'm going to put links in the description where you can get this, and you can actually use the 14-day trial version for the beta and simply get up and running with this. There's still going to be talks about how you can get up and running with several things, and with that said, let's get right into the video. So with Embergen beta open right here, you can notice that the UI looks pretty different. Now if I go ahead and open up the previous version of Embergen, you would also notice that there's a huge difference within the UI. This is what the Embergen previous version used to look like. Let's press the playback button. You can see that the UI sort of looks similar, but there is a huge difference in terms of what you can see from here. You can also notice the change in the viewport, which actually is a huge deal for me. There is now the new logo, which you can see right there, and within the node editor you can see that the node graph now really works pretty fine compared to what we had before, which was basic stuff which you can simply pull and push here and there. There was really nothing that you can connect, but in the new version right now, which is the beta, there is an entire node system that makes it super cool for you to go ahead and work with. Now speaking about the improvement for the UI, you can now literally see that once I select a shape, which is now properly defined here, I now have a manipulator or a gizmo. Now this gizmo can actually help me move things around, contrary to what we had before, which literally there was no gizmo, as you only have a button here known as emitter. This is a huge change for me, as right now I can easily select the shape which I want and move the shape around. Now by simply moving this shape around, you can also choose to rotate the shape. So if I simply go ahead right now, I can easily rotate the shape, and if you're into animating object, this is going to be really helpful as you proceed to get some very nice volumetric stuff happening in your scene. Now with this, there is also a long list of nodes that you can have access to, and once you right click, you can actually see all of them from here. And the beautiful thing with this new one is by simply selecting, you can now change directly from here whatever you want. So let's say if I want to have a a torus like this, I can have that going. I can choose to increase, reduce the size. I can also choose and switch this to cone and have a beautiful cone going on right there. So let's just simply select this and move this around, and whenever you're working with this tool and you notice it's clipping right there, that is the bound limits which you can easily show just in case you want to see what is going on. All right, so right now I can use this gizmo and move things around, and for me this is a very huge improvement. And despite the gizmo, you would notice that we now have an incredible timeline. Of course we did have a timeline in the previous one, which is what we have right here, but you can actually notice that in the new one, which is what we have now, that the UI or the timeline looks a little bit more clean. Now despite the fact that it looks clean, there is a lovely graph editor that you can actually tweak your animation from. The UI buttons also looks way better, as you can simply use these buttons to reset, use these buttons to click and reveal timeline and also the graph, and at the same time the tweaking of the buttons are even way better than what it used to look like before. There's some other few improvements that you might have noticed within the UI, which has to do with the HDRI. Right now you can notice that the HDRI looks pretty decent, and also you can physically see the directional light at any point in time that you're trying to light, relight, and also get up and running with your stuff. You can choose to show the maps if you want to see them. You can choose to show the temperature, show the velocity, and also show the limits. These are very beautiful updates, and it's pretty interesting to see that they've taken their time to work on all of this cool, lovely stuff and enhancements that we have always wanted to see. Now with this said, let's dive directly into some beautiful stuff that you need to know. Now one of the biggest things that has actually made its way is colliders. Now what I mean by colliders is you can now bring in your own 3D model and use them as colliders while trying to generate your own volumetric. So how we can get this going is by simply right clicking, going over to where we have shape. So we're going to start out by using a very basic shape first of all, and I'm just going to link this as a collider. Now how you can actually get your colliders happening is once you click and drag to a point, you would notice you have some other nodes that it's going to suggest that you can work with. So right now, if I want to make a blend between this and something else, we have this is something that is considered as a mix or as a merge node in several other apps, but right here it is known as blend. You can also choose to throw in a modifier. We're going to come to that, and you can choose to use this shape as a collider. So I'm just going to set this one as a collider and click out. Let's get this one right here. And then from the collider, I'm just going to drag this and lock this over to this part that has to do with the collider. Now, once I have this going, you would notice a little change directly here. And it actually becomes way interesting once I select on any of these handles and I start moving these across. You can now see that we can use this, this object or this shape to collide on the fluid, to collide on the volumetric object, and get some very interesting effects. So for example, let's say you want to shoot cannonballs, or let's say you want to get a car to drive past through a certain point and you want these things to collide, or you simply want the fluid simulation to collide with a wall or something, then this is going to make so much sense, as you can now make all of those interesting changes and decisions right here by simply playing with the node editor and also the node graph. And still speaking about the things that you can do, we already talked about adding some blend. So from here, if I simply select this as a blend, I can lock this as the first shape. So I'm just going to click right here and press the delete button to get rid of that. And also I'm going to drag the shape node and connect this over to this part. Then the next thing which I need to do is right click, create a brand new shape, and get a different primitive shape at this point. And I'm also going to load this primitive shape right here. So with this, I'm going to set this particular primitive shape to something else. So let's say we can maybe set this as a box. And then for the second one, I'm simply going to set this as a sphere. So by simply having these two right now, I can grab on this. So if I simply select this, I can have these two and simply have them as a merged object. So right now, if we want to start moving them, we can simply use these two objects to get like a very quick build up, or simply a very quick representation of the main model that we want to use to start having those collisions. So if you're thinking about making collisions out of very basic objects and you want to merge them, this is exactly how you can get things going. On the other hand, if you're also thinking about how you can use objects and generate various simulations out of different objects at the same time, you can also use the blend option to get this one going. And for a very quick example for that one, I'm going to simply select this, which has to do with the collider, and press the delete button to get rid of that. And instead of loading the default shape, which is the cone, I'm going to select these two objects and use the blend to drive the shape for the emission. And I'm also going to go ahead and select the link and press the delete button to get rid of that. So right now you would notice that we have the main object, which is right here, and the secondary object, which is right here, and we can have our simulation coming out from the both of them at the same time. At any point in time, you don't want to get this limit to actually constrain you while you're doing your animation or while you're doing your simulation. What you can do is to go over to the simulation section. So I can go over to this simulation section or go over to the simulation node right here, and from here you can easily increase the resolution bounds, and once I click and drag, I can apply new resolution, and by simply clicking on apply new resolution, you'll notice we have a much more higher bounds, and this is going to take a toll on your GPU depending on how much simulation you're having and how much stuff you want to get going. Now the beautiful thing is we're running an NVIDIA RTX 5000, and that is why we're having this simulation happening as fast as it can. So beautiful stuff right here you can get. Now while we're talking about how you can mix stuff and how you can use nodes, we already talked about you being able to bring in your own primitive objects right here. So the very first thing which we're going to do, a very quick thing, is to drag in our regular Suzanne from Blender and try her right here. And to do that, I'm just simply going to jump right into Blender, create Suzanne, give her some subdivisions, throw her back here, and we're going to get started. So back here in Embergen, what we're going to do is to create a brand new shape node. We can choose to click right here and go through, but we are not going to be able to load anything by simply using the previous shape node. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete, right click, shape, and then go down to where we have mesh. Now with this mesh right here, I can choose to load the file in. So we already got Suzanne, you know, out of Blender, so let's go ahead and load her in. And by simply loading this in, you would notice that there is nothing that is visible. Right now, if I simply move this around, you would notice we haven't gotten anything linked up to the emitter, and for that we would not be able to see whatever we've loaded. So I'm just going to click drag right here, select this node, and also go ahead and delete it. Now by selecting this, you might also not see anything because we have not voxelized the mesh that we loaded in. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on voxelize, and right here you can see we have lovely Suzanne, you know, healthy, hearty, just simply burning all the way up. If you want to also get Suzanne to become a collision object, you can simply get that going. All you need to do is just simply select the object, Ctrl C to make a copy, and Ctrl V to paste that, and we can simply wire this all the way to a collider. And from this collider, so let's simply bring this down, we can load in our perfect object. So by bringing that right there, we can simply, you know, load Suzanne directly there and use her to create some collision around these parts. So with all of this beautiful stuff, you might want to also play with the forces and also, you know, play with some other cool things here. So if you simply right click, you can go through and play with some very interesting things that you can have here. For now, the only light that's available is the directional light, which is very contrary to what we had in the previous Embergen, which had to do with various types of light that existed. So in the previous version of Embergen, there was different kinds of light that you can find, which was both the point light and also the directional light. These two lights were very interesting, as you can get some very lovely effects by simply using the point light. But now in the new version of Embergen, we only have access to the directional light. So with all of this beautiful stuff, let's take a look at the forces that you can now use. So for this, I'm just going to zoom in just a little bit, and let's clean up our scene by selecting all of these and move them right there. Beautiful. So with this right now, I would right click and go over to where we have forces, and you can literally use any of these forces right here to start making some very interesting stuff in your scene. So I'm just going to go ahead and play with about two of them, and if I simply click on the point, I can use this and drive the forces of the simulation. Now how you can get this one going, you might have also noticed that you can still plug this within the force which exists around the emitter for the primitives, but now I just want to simply use this to drive the simulation. By simply clicking this, you'll notice we have a gizmo, and with this gizmo we can change the direction of things. But why would we want to do that when we have this gizmo that would just give us leverage to bring this around there? So I'm just going to position this right there, and we can simply use the forces to cause some sort of distortion by repelling the entire simulation. So from here, if I just simply click and drag, you would notice that the more I increase the repel strength, the more we repel the, you know, the simulation that we're creating. So from here you can get some very interesting things happening. You can make this stay in, you can push this all the way out, and if you're into animating, you know, stuff like this, you can just simply get some very random stuff going on here. One thing which I would really love to see is some wranglers that you can use to change attributes, or, you know, some nodes that you can use to throw in some random expressions and stuff like that. I think that is going to really give a huge room to artists and persons that wants to create simulation. That might actually reduce how much time you get to keyframe stuff directly here in Embergen. So with the point, I'm going to simply, you know, delete that, right click and go back to the forces, and you can see we have the noise as well, which you can also go ahead and explore, and we also have the line. And if I simply connect the line to the forces for the simulation, we can also have some beautiful stuff going on here. You can see that by just simply adding the line, we had an entirely different animation going on that has to do with the sim. And if I simply delete this, you're going to notice that we're having something totally different. All right, this has a huge impact to the simulation, and if you're going for something like this is very interesting to see that you have a tool which is more or less all encompassing, and within the simulation section you can do some very interesting stuff. So if I simply click right here and press the delete button, we can get rid of that, and we can also, you know, delete this right here. If I simply select on the simulation, we can go down and we can make some changes, and you can also notice all of these things are collapsible, so you can simply collapse them if you want. If you simply think they're a lot you know, for you to just simply remember what you're doing with them, you can go ahead and collapse them. And for here, you can also notice that you have some wind, you have some forces, and you can choose to make adjustments and play with these things as much as you want. So simulation looks really cool. Within the volume section, you also have a couple of volume stuff that you might also want to play with, and I like the way that they've gone ahead to organize this entire thing. And the beautiful part is, even if you're just getting into Embergen for the very first time, it's extremely easy to use, as all you need to do is go over to the new section and load up a brand new preset and you get started. Actually, once you click on the file and click on new, you would notice that you have an already made preset that you can start building your entire simulation from. And this makes a lot of sense, and I really wish that, you know, a whole lot of people can jump right into this tool and get started with working with them. Now, with this said, I'm also going to talk about one more cool stuff that you can do. So if we simply right click and go over to where we have shapes, you'll notice that we have something called particles. All right, so I can simply click on the particles and get this one right here. And if I also right click and go over here, you'll notice we have something called noise. Actually, let's talk about the modifier as well. So if I simply get this one done, let's select this, which is our basic shape, and load the shape over to where we have as modifiers, and then I can load this shape right into the shape section. Let's go ahead and kill this out, and by simply deleting that, I can now have a very interesting stuff going right here. Now, what the modifier helps you do is, if you already have a shape and you want them to have much more rounded edges, this can help you get that effect. If you also have a shape and you don't want them to have that rounded effect, you just want them to have that golf ball effect, it's also going to help you get that. So from here, we can start throwing in a little bit of noise by simply, you know, cranking this all the way up, and you can start noticing that we're having some very, you know, harsh edges. You can see that right there. And for the frequency, we can also play with the frequency. And the beautiful part about all of this is you can go in and actually animate all of them how you want. We're just going to dive directly into the animation very soon, but before we do that, let's talk about the particles. So for the particles, how you can also get this one going is, once you click, you can drag and connect this over to the particles, and from here I'm just going to select this link and press the delete button to get rid of that. Of course, you don't really see anything happening in the particles because right now we just have this set to single burst, and just like every other kind of particles emission, you have something known as time, you have like the lifespan, and so on and so forth. So for here, I'm just going to go ahead and set these to multiple bursts, so you can start noticing that we're having multiple bursts going in. One of the very interesting things that we can do once we go over to the simulation is we can choose the type of simulation mode that we want. Right now it's set to combustion. We can simply set this to basic, and all we can get is smoke, and we can also choose to set this to colored smoke and simply get colored smoke out of this. So if we want to set this as combustion and you want to control how much combustion, or let's say how much fire you get to see in comparison with the ratio of the smoke that you're getting, then you need to proceed to the volume. Now, once we jump directly into the volume, we can start making some very beautiful, you know, changes right here. So one of the very cool changes that you can make has to do with you being able to change the density of both the flame and also the density of the smoke. So if I simply zoom right in here, so let's just simply get this one there and go over to where we have the density scale, I can choose to increase the density. You can start noticing that we have more dense smoke, and I can simply tone that down, and I can tone this up and down depending on what we want to get. And on the other hand, I can also choose to tone up and down the density of the flame, which has to do with this. So I can simply increase the scale of the flame, or I can simply reduce the scale of the flame, and you can start noticing that we're having some very tiny particles that you can go in and start making some very interesting tweaks from. So beautiful, interesting things that you might want to play with. And if you just simply want to make this one a continuous stuff, you can jump back to this node, and you can also notice, you know, that we have this, so you can animate these around if this is also something that you want. If you also need the timing for these to happen really quick, you can bring this down. As you can notice, we're having more faster bursts, and if you want this to have a much more slower burst, you can also play with the time slider and get these effects. And the fact that this is, you know, keyframeable just simply makes everything looks pretty nice. And you can also choose to increase the burst size and also reduce the burst size. This is just totally dependent on what you want to get at the end of the day. At any point in time you feel very confused, or maybe you're trying to get some things going and you're trying to find some references that you're going to learn from, there is a huge set of presets that comes with Embergen. Go ahead, check them out, you know, play with them, make some tweaks, look at how you can get things started and get working with that. But before you actually start getting, you know, happy with all of those nodes and cranking those, you know, parameters up and down, let's take a look at how you can bring in something very interesting from Blender and also see how you can animate that right here. So for that, we're going to jump into Blender 2.9, where we're going to create a very simple low poly model of a car. And to get this going, we're going to use very basic tools. Now the very first one is going to be the brand new tool in Blender that actually helps you extrude, insert, and also, you know, delete several faces at any given time. And we have already covered that in the channel. If you want to check that out, check out the video that has to do with Blender 2.9. And on the other hand, we're also going to go ahead and bevel some parts, add a couple of loops, you know, insert some parts, and then get things going. And with that, ta-da, we have a brand new car. Now we're going to ship that car back into Embergen, as this is just the sole purpose of creating that car in the very first place. So by simply bringing this car directly into Embergen, we would go through and create a brand new preset. All right, so this is going to be very lovely. So with this one, I'm also going to go ahead and right click, go over to the shape, and directly within the shape, actually let's make this a collider, but we need to bring this as a shape first. So shape, mesh, load up, and get that car. And with the car model loaded, next thing which we need to do is just simply drag within the collider and select collider, drag within the shape and connect the shape. And you would notice we're getting the very same Suzanne the monkey that we have. Now the reason why we're getting this is because we have not voxelized the car. So in case you have this problem, don't feel like it's a problem, don't feel like you have a bug. The only thing is you did not voxelize your present, you know, model. So that is why it is still reading from the previous model that was voxelized and imported. So I'm just going to go ahead and click right here and simply click on voxelize. And once I do that, you would notice we have our brand new car right here. So I'm just going to bring this all the way up. And I really love the idea of this gizmo, and you can see we have our car in flames. So what if we just want this car to rotate and get some very fancy things happening? We can simply get this one going, and you can see how this reacts. Pretty insane. I love this. All right, so I love this, and you can just simply make some lovely movements around here. Very lovely. All right, extremely lovely. Let's go ahead and increase the bounds, as this is actually limiting how much things that we can get going. So I'm also going to go ahead and just simply increase the bounds right here. So let's get this going. Apply new, so we can have a huge bound. Lovely. So we can also choose to, you know, increase this as much as we want. I wouldn't want to increase the z-axis because the z-axis actually points upwards. I'm just going to go ahead and increase the y, and then we can get a huge one right there. So with this, you can also notice that by simply changing this, our simulation actually happens a little bit slower, like we talked about earlier. So I'm also going to be able to go back, select this object, and then we can start making some very cool movements right here. This is just so brilliant, the animation you can see here. But then if you want to get this out of here and you want to animate this and you want to take this animation out into your game engine or into Blender, how we can do that is also very interesting and simple. So what we're going to do is rapidly go through and create a very quick animations and show you how you can export this as either a flipbook or a VDB, just in case you want to load these in this is the app of your choice, or maybe you just want to simply load this into your game engine. So for this, what we're going to do is simply, what I'm going to do now is simply set the rotation of everything back to 0, 0, 0. So we have this at 0. I'm also going to simply select this handle right here, and I'm going to move this car backwards just about this point. So let's simply have this right here, and I'm also going to go ahead, select this primitive and position this primitive just right about there. All right, so with this, I'm going to proceed to make a selection and, you know, reset this just to make sure I have that. Stop the animation, reset it, and then we have this set to 0. So you can notice we have this at 0, which simply means there is no animation, it's not running, nothing is happening. Actually, anytime you want to play back your animation, you can just press the space bar on your keyboard and you can get that one going. But for this case, we don't want to do that, so I'm just going to reset everything and from here we can start putting in the keyframe. So from this part, I'm going to keyframe only the position. So I'm just going to go ahead and click, and by simply clicking, I would make sure that I know exactly the direction. So for this direction, I need to move this, and you can notice we're moving within the y-axis. All right, so let's undo that and set this back to 0. So let's just go back and set this back to 0, and then I'm going to come right here and simply let's get this one back to where it is. I would right click here to initiate a brand new keyframe. Now you also notice that by simply clicking right here, our keyframe jumps, our object jumps to the very beginning. So what we want to do is to simply use the sliders that we have around here to change the position. So we can simply select the object as it is, and then we can change the position of our object and where we want the keyframe to start from. So I can have that there and move over to a frame like, let's say, frame 60. So if we can come over to a frame like this, I can right click to keep a keyframe there or set a keyframe there, click right there. All right, and then from here I would be able to also change the animation or change the keys that I want. So let's simply press the playback button to have this one going, and at a frame exactly at this point I can proceed to start making those changes. Now it's also worth knowing that right now there is actually, you know, really no way that you can play with the time slider head, which is something I've been trying to do for a very long time, but it seems to be that there is really no way. So I am just going to, you know, eyeball this backwards, press the playback button, and you can see what we have. And I also think it's quite brilliant that they've actually gone ahead. So if I simply double click right here, so I think it's quite brilliant that they've actually gone ahead to add, you know, the graph editor. So with the graph editor, you can simply make some selections. Like I can simply go all the way, select the appropriate parameter that I want to make my changes to, and from here you can start tweaking these changes and getting some very cool results. Of course, there's a couple of improvements that needs to be done with a tool like this, but for the most part, this simply works, and you can go ahead and start having fun while working with this. So if I simply reset this and press the playback button, I can use this handle right now to either fast forward how I want this to go, or, you know, reduce the time of how much I want this to happen. So this is very, very intuitive, and for anyone who wants to simply start getting, you know, up and running with Embergen, of course, I do know that this is going to be worth it. So let's simply reset this, press the playback button, and you can see we have that lovely animation happening right there. So you can still choose to animate, you know, the volume itself. It's not only the model that you bring in that you can animate, as you can proceed to get some very interesting stuff going for you. The Embergen, you know, playback actually happens, you know, forever. So if you're playing back this, you would notice that it does not repeat. There is no loop happening. But if you want to get your loop happening, you can easily have that one going. So you can go over to the simulation section, and within the part where you have your, you know, your time control, you can switch there and change these to loop timeline. You can get that one by simply changing this there, and from here you can, you know, set the start time to 0, and for our case we can set the end time to frame 40. So with that happening, you can now see that you can, you know, have some very interesting stuff going for you. Click drag just in case you want to change the positioning of the timeline, something like that. And for that, I would also, you know, come here and change this to 120 just to update the animation, as this is also something that is worth doing. So with all of these beautiful things said, it is just interesting to see that you have a tool that you can use to create, you know, some very interesting looking volumetrics, and at the same time you can still change several parameters that has to do with this. Like if you want to go ahead and play with the wind, for example, you can still get that one happening. So for our case, I'm just going to pause the animation, select the keyframe, and simply delete that, since this is not what we want to do now, and reset this all the way to the beginning. Let's go back to the simulation and also change, you know, from the timing, let's go ahead and change this to no looping. And I'm also going to go ahead and, you know, bring this all the way down. Next thing which I would like to do is select our mesh, position the mesh to a point like this, select our main shape, press the playback button just to initialize that, and get the main shape right to a point like that. Also reset this and press the playback button, and you can also see what we're having. And for the wind, we can actually get some very interesting stuff happening. Now, right now, as we have our, our object at this point, and also have the main object, or have our emitter at the other point, we can choose to start making some very interesting stuff. We can drag the wind, and the more we drag the wind, you can see the wind blows the object backwards to a point like that. And with this, I can now go back, select our object, position this object right here. If we want to change the radius, as maybe this might be a little bit too much, we can also choose to do that. And for our main vehicle like this, we can also push this down to a point like that. So this looks like it's a little bit too small, so I'm just going to reinitialize that to be something about this point. So let's simply make this 0.8 for example, so we can have some stuff, get some action right there. And I'm also going to go through and change this. Instead of it being a sphere, let's simply change this to a box. Maybe this might actually come in pretty nice. And with that done, we can also play with the height. Let's make that height just a little bit down to a point like this, and of course you can start seeing some very beautiful stuff happening right there. If you want to export this, there are several ways you can proceed to exporting the tool, which you can get started with by simply going over to the capture section, and then you can load up various parts that you want to capture. So if you want to capture the emissive, if you want to capture the alpha, if you want to capture some other parts, so for example like the normal and so on, you can choose to get these ones happening. And once you click, you can select export image and link all of the RGB channels to where you want them to be. And once you click on the export image, you can select the file name, and then you can proceed to hitting the export button to export these things. If you want to still debug them, or maybe you want to preview these things before you proceed to exporting them, you can also choose to do that by simply going over to the preview section. Then you can check these individual channels and see how the best suits what you want to work with before you can proceed to do that. So this in itself has to do with you working with image sequences, but if you're looking forward to exporting an entire VDB, how you can get that one going is fairly simple. So for this now, I'm just going to go ahead and select this and simply turn these ones all the way up. So I'm going to right click, go over to this part called export. You can see we have export as both image, which is what we had before, or you can simply right click and export VDB. So once you go ahead and simply select export VDB, you can link this back to the simulation, and this is what you can get out of the object when you want to start exporting. So once you link this, you can now have that one going. And if you jump back into our ray tracer, we can simply tell Embergen that what we want to export right now is from one given frame to another, and it is best that you know the amount of frames you want to export before you proceed to start exporting that. So from here, I can simply set this to maybe 0 and set the final one to about 150 for example. Now this is just the framings I want to export, and for the types, or let's say the channels, the values, the parameters, and all of those things, if you want to export them, you can choose to select individual ones like this and proceed to exporting them as much as you want. So pretty interesting stuff that you can get. And once you get these ones out, you can bring them over to Blender, and from Blender you can actually make several changes to what you're doing. So if you're also thinking about how you can get started with working with VDB in Blender, we already covered a video about that. Link is going to be in the description where you can find that and also get fun and have fun playing with that. And at the same time, if you're trying to check out several videos, we talked about updates and very cool stuff, tricks and stuff you can find in Blender. Links are also going to be in the description where you can get busy with that. I'm very excited for this new tool, this new update, and the beta. So you can go through, download this, start playing with it. And that's going to be about it, guys. I would like to know what you guys think about all of this beautiful stuff in the comment section. And if you like this tool, you like this video, you learned something from this, you're into simulation, you're into fluid stuff, you want to get started with some very amazing things, tell me what you guys think about all of this beautiful stuff in the comment section. And of course, if you like this video or you learned something from this, you can go ahead and give it a like, and don't forget to share with your friends. And if you're new here, it's going to be amazing for you to hit the subscribe button and also turn on notifications so that you don't miss the next video or the next update. And until I see you guys again with a tutorial update, Free Friday, Tutorial Tuesday, tips and tricks, things like this. Peace.